The Hidden Garden, a journey to uncovering the roots of anger. In the heart of a dense and ancient forest, where the trees whispered secrets to one another, and the streams sang songs of forgotten times, there was a small village named Liora. This village was unique, not just because of its breathtaking beauty, but because its inhabitants carried within them a deep and mysterious anger. This anger was like a silent fire, smoldering within the hearts of the villagers, often flaring up in ways that puzzled and hurt them. Among these villagers was a woman named Liora. She was known for her strength, wisdom, and a heart full of love. Yet, despite these qualities, Liora often found herself gripped by a fierce anger that she could not fully understand. It would emerge suddenly, like a storm breaking across a clear sky, leaving her and those around her shaken. Liora's anger was different from others. It wasn't just an annoyance or a fleeting frustration. It was a deep, burning sensation that felt as though it was rooted in something much larger. When it arose, it took over her entire being, making her say and do things she would later regret. She would snap at her loved ones, withdraw from friends, and often isolate herself, overwhelmed by feelings she couldn't control. Despite her best efforts to suppress or ignore this anger, it only seemed to grow stronger. Liora began to notice that it was affecting her relationships, her work, and even her health. She often felt tired and drained, as if the anger was slowly consuming her from the inside out. She knew that she needed to do something, but she didn't know where to start. One day, as Liora wandered through the forest in search of some peace, she came across an old, weathered path she'd never noticed before. The path was overgrown with vines and surrounded by trees that seemed ancient and wise. Something about the path called to her, and without hesitation, she decided to follow it. The path wound through the forest, leading Liora deeper and deeper into its heart. After what felt like hours, she found herself standing in front of a large iron gate. The gate was covered in rust, but it was still sturdy and imposing. Beyond it, she could see the outlines of a garden, one that seemed both wild and carefully tended at the same time. Curious, Liora pushed the gate open, the metal creaking in protest. As she stepped inside, she was struck by the beauty of the garden. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Flowers of every color bloomed in abundance, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of jasmine and roses. Yet, there was something else about the garden that caught her attention, something deeper and more mysterious. As Liora walked further into the garden, she noticed that some parts of it were thriving, while others were overgrown and neglected. The paths were winding and sometimes led to dead ends, and there were hidden corners where shadows lingered. It was as if the garden was a reflection of her own heart, beautiful, but with areas that were dark, tangled, and unkempt. Suddenly, Liora heard a gentle voice behind her. She turned to see an elderly woman, her hair as silver as the moonlight, standing among the flowers. The woman's eyes were kind and knowing, and her presence was calming. "Welcome, Liora," the woman said, as if she had been expecting her. "This is the Garden of the Soul. It is a place where one can uncover the hidden roots of their emotions, particularly anger. Many have walked these paths before you, seeking understanding and healing." Liora was stunned. "How do you know my name?" she asked. The woman smiled gently. "I know many things, my dear. But most importantly, I know why you are here. You are seeking to understand the anger that resides within you, aren't you?" Liora nodded, unable to speak. How could this woman know the turmoil she had been experiencing? The woman continued, "Anger is like a wildfire, Liora. It can destroy everything in its path if left unchecked. But beneath that anger lies a deeper truth, a root cause that, if understood, can be healed. This garden is a space where you can uncover that root cause. But first, you must be willing to explore it with an open heart and mind." Liora felt a mix of emotions, fear, curiosity, and hope. "How do I begin?" she asked. The woman gestured to the garden around them. Each part of this garden represents a different aspect of your soul. Some parts are bright and thriving, while others are dark and tangled. Your anger is rooted in one of these darker places. To uncover the root cause, you must walk the paths, explore the shadows, and ask the right questions. But remember, awareness is the first step to change. As you become aware of what lies beneath your anger, you will begin to heal. With those words, the woman vanished, leaving Liora alone in the garden. But Liora didn't feel abandoned. She felt guided, as if the garden itself was urging her forward. She began to walk the paths, each step bringing her closer to the heart of the garden. As she walked, she noticed that the flowers and plants reflected her emotions. The bright, vibrant flowers represented her joys and successes, while the overgrown and shadowed areas seemed to mirror her fears, insecurities, and unresolved pain. Liora paused at one particularly tangled section of the garden. The plants here were thorny and wild, and the air felt heavy. She could feel her anger bubbling up, just standing there, as if this part of the garden was challenging her to confront it. Taking a deep breath, Liora stepped into the tangled area. The thorns scratched at her skin, but she pressed on, determined to find the root of her anger. As she moved deeper, she began to see images from her past memories she had long buried. She saw herself as a child, feeling neglected and unheard. She saw the moments of betrayal, the times when she had been hurt by those she loved, and the fears that had taken root in her heart. Tears streamed down Liora's face as she realized that her anger was not just about the present, it was a culmination of all the pain she had carried with her for years. Her anger had been a shield, protecting her from feeling the deeper emotions of hurt, fear, and sadness. At the center of this tangled section of the garden, Liora found a small, wilted tree. Its roots were gnarled and twisted, and it seemed to be struggling to survive. She knelt beside it, placing her hands on the ground, and suddenly she knew this was the root of her anger. This tree represented all the unresolved pain and unmet needs that had festered within her for so long. But now that she was aware of it, she could begin to heal. Liora remembered the words of the old woman: awareness is the first step to change. She knew that by tending to this tree, by nurturing it, and giving it the care it needed, she could transform her anger into something positive. Over the days and weeks that followed, Liora returned to the garden again and again. She watered the tree, pruned the thorns, and cleared away the dead leaves. As she did so, she noticed that the tree began to grow stronger. Its leaves became greener, its roots untangled, and it even began to bloom. Liora also noticed changes within herself. The more she tended to the garden, the more her anger transformed. It no longer flared up uncontrollably. Instead, she found herself pausing, reflecting, and responding with understanding and compassion. She realized that her anger had been a signal, guiding her to the areas of her soul that needed healing. By opening herself to that awareness, she was able to turn her conflicts into opportunities for growth and connection. The villagers soon noticed the change in Liora. She was still strong and resilient, but there was a new softness to her, a sense of peace that radiated from within. They began to come to her for advice, not just because of her wisdom, but because they could see that she had found a way to transform her anger into something beautiful. One day, as Liora walked through the village, she saw the old woman from the garden. The woman smiled at her, and Liora felt a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you," Liora said, "for guiding me to the garden and helping me understand my anger." The old woman nodded. "The garden was always within you, Liora. I simply showed you the way. Remember, the journey to understanding and healing is ongoing. As you continue to tend to your garden, you will find that your anger can become a source of strength and wisdom, guiding you to deeper connections with yourself and others." With those words, the old woman disappeared into the crowd, leaving Liora with a heart full of peace and a soul that had begun to bloom anew. And so, Liora continued to tend to her inner garden, knowing that by understanding the root cause of her anger, she had not only transformed herself, but had also opened the door to a life filled with growth, connection, and lasting peace. As time passed, Liora's reputation in the village grew. People began to see her not only as a strong and capable woman, but also as someone who possessed a profound understanding of the human heart. She became known as the Keeper of the Hidden Garden, a title that reflected the journey she had undertaken to uncover and nurture the roots of her own soul. But Liora didn't keep the wisdom she had gained to herself. She knew that many in the village struggled with their own hidden anger, just as she once had. She began to invite those who were ready to explore their emotions to join her in the hidden garden, guiding them along the same paths she had walked. Each person who came to her had their own unique story, their own tangled sections of the garden to tend to. There was Thomas, a man whose anger stemmed from a deep sense of failure and regret. He had always felt that he hadn't lived up to his father's expectations, and this unspoken shame had turned into bitterness. Under Liora's guidance, Thomas walked through the shadows of his garden, uncovering the old memories that had been feeding his anger. Together, they nurtured the roots of his self-worth, and Thomas began to see himself not as a failure, but as someone who had the courage to face his past and grow from it. Then there was Liora, a young woman whose anger was tied to the grief of losing her mother at a young age. Her anger was a shield that protected her from the deep sadness she had never allowed herself to feel. In the garden, Liora helped Liora confront her grief, and with time, Liora found that her anger softened, replaced by a newfound sense of peace and acceptance. As more villagers came to Liora, the hidden garden became a place of healing and transformation for the entire community. The once overgrown paths began to clear, and the garden bloomed with new life. Each person who walked those paths contributed to the garden's beauty, planting seeds of understanding, compassion, and connection. Liora herself continued to grow and evolve. She realized that her journey of understanding and healing was never truly complete. There were always new layers to uncover, new emotions to explore, and new opportunities for growth. She remained humble in her role as a guide, knowing that she was simply a fellow traveler on the path of life. One day, as Liora sat in the garden, reflecting on all that had transpired, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She thought back to the time when her anger had felt like an insurmountable obstacle, something that threatened to consume her entirely. But now, she saw it for what it truly was: a signpost, a signal that had guided her to the parts of herself that needed attention and care. Liora also recognized that the garden was more than just a physical place. It was a reflection of the human soul, a space where light and shadow coexisted, where beauty and pain intertwined. The garden was a reminder that true healing required both awareness and action, that by tending to the roots of our emotions, we could cultivate a life filled with growth, resilience, and connection. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the garden, Liora noticed a small figure standing at the gate. It was a young girl, no more than 10 years old, with wide, curious eyes. The girl hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached Liora. "Are you the keeper of the hidden garden?" the girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liora smiled warmly and nodded. "Yes, I am. What brings you here, little one?" The girl looked down at her feet, shyly twisting a strand of her hair. I feel something inside me. It feels like fire, and it makes me say mean things to my friends. I don't want to feel like this, but I don't know how to make it go away." Liora's heart swelled with compassion. She could see the familiar signs of anger in the girl, and she knew that this was the beginning of the girl's own journey of self-discovery. "Come with me," Liora said gently, extending her hand. "Let's walk through the garden together. We'll find out where that fire is coming from and how to calm it. You're not alone, and you don't have to carry that burden by yourself." The girl hesitated for a moment, then took Liora's hand. Together, they walked down the path, surrounded by the vibrant colors and soothing scents of the garden. As they walked, Liora began to talk to the girl about anger, explaining how it often masks deeper feelings, just as she had once learned. "The first step to change is awareness," Liora said softly. "When we understand where our anger comes from, we can begin to heal. And as we heal, we can turn that fire into something that warms and nurtures, rather than burns and hurts." The girl listened intently, her fear gradually melting away as she felt the calming presence of the garden and the comforting words of Liora. For the first time, she felt a sense of hope, a belief that she could understand and control the fire within her. As they walked deeper into the garden, Liora guided the girl to a small clearing where a young sapling grew. It was delicate and tender, its roots just beginning to take hold in the earth. Liora knelt beside the sapling, and the girl followed suit. "This sapling is like the feelings inside you," Liora explained. "It needs care and attention to grow strong. Together, we'll nurture it, and as it grows, so will your understanding of your emotions." The girl nodded, and together they began to tend to the sapling. They watered it, cleared away any weeds, and made sure it had enough sunlight. As they worked, Liora shared stories of her own journey, of how she had once been overwhelmed by her own anger, and how she had found peace by understanding and healing the roots of her emotions. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky turned a deep shade of indigo. As the first stars began to twinkle above, Liora and the girl sat quietly by the sapling, feeling the gentle breeze and listening to the sounds of the night. "Thank you," the girl whispered, her voice filled with a new sense of calm. "I feel different now, like the fire isn't so big anymore." Liora smiled and hugged the girl. "You've taken the first step, my dear. The journey ahead will have its challenges, but remember that you are strong and capable. And whenever you need guidance, the garden will always be here for you." As they left the garden and returned to the village, Liora knew that the girl had begun her own path of healing and understanding, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the hidden garden was no longer just her sanctuary. It had become a place of healing for all who sought it. In the years that followed, the garden continued to flourish, and so did the village of Liora. The villagers learned to tend to their own inner gardens, turning their anger into opportunities for growth and connection. The once hidden garden became a symbol of the village's collective journey, a reminder that true healing came from within, and that by opening spaces to understand the root causes of their emotions, they could cultivate a life of peace, harmony, and deep connection with themselves and each other. And as for Liora, she continued to walk the paths of the garden, guiding others on their journeys, always aware that the garden, like life itself, was a living, breathing entity, a place where both light and shadow existed in balance, and where the seeds of understanding could grow into the flowers of wisdom and love.